Dr. Taylor. Thank you again, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Connolly, for taking the time out of your busy days to chat with us. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure that a lot of students are also going to benefit from hearing your vet school stories and all of the challenges that you faced and the challenges that you continue to face and just career advice and all that fun stuff. So I'm just going to have this be a very open conversation. Both of you can share your individual experiences in vet school and all that jazz. So yeah, I guess we can start with Dr. Taylor. What inspired you to go to vet school, and we can go from there. Your experiences, any particular instance that stood out. And if I have any questions, I may pop in. And if those in the audience have any questions, they can also chime in as well.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, my name is Dr. Ingrid Taylor. I am a veterinarian and a writer, and I went to veterinary school from, 2002 to 2006. So I graduated in 2006. My background is in emergency and critical care practice, although I did spend several years in general practice as well. And I also served in the Air Force as a public health officer. So I have a background in public health as well as a veterinarian. So in terms of what inspired me to go to veterinary school, this was kind of in some ways a second career for me. I started out, I have a master's degree in international studies, and I actually started out working in advocacy, women's rights and advocacy. And one of the first projects that I took on was working in Malaysia and working with a local organization that was the first women's domestic violence shelter in the country. So I kind of started from that perspective. I was raised on a farm in Minnesota, and I had grown up with animals, had a lot of contact with animals, and considered myself a really deep animal lover, but did not really see veterinary school as an option. I honestly thought it was too restrictive of a career, and I didn't feel like I would have the kind of opportunities to do the kind of advocacy work and travel that I wanted to do. So I did spend a few years traveling around the world, and after that decided, well, I do want to give veterinary school a try. So I applied and got in, and after that just continued on as a veterinarian. So so I did come a little bit late to the career. Among the students in my class, I was definitely one of the older students in the class, so kind of came in with a little bit of a different perspective, I think. And I think not doing the traditional animal science route that many veterinary students do, I think that also benefited me, and because I kind of came in with a different perspective to veterinary school. I don't know if I'm just supposed to keep on talking or if anyone is asking questions.
No, like please keep going. And actually,
I'm like monologuing here, so jump in.
Monologue away. It's a great one. So I guess that's a really interesting point that you brought up with, like, you've done a lot of advocate. You've had a background in women's rights and other social justice issues. Do you think that changed your perspective? Like, you already came in with that social justice lens when coming into vet school, and were you already thinking about the relationship that our species share with animals?
I was definitely thinking about that, but it was an underdeveloped lens, I would say. I was still it was something that I thought about, but I think it was still very much colored by speciesism, and I was still very much caught up in sort of the speciesist type way of thinking. I mean, one reason that I did want to go to veterinary school was because when I was in Malaysia and Indonesia and other areas, I had the perception that having animals really helped people out of poverty. Basically, the ability to use animals as commodities helped people. I learned, so that was still kind of my lens that was coloring everything. But I do think that kind of led me into starting to question some of these relationships and starting to think about things in different ways. And then, as I learned later that, there are other strategies that can be used, and that, commodifying animals is actually one of the huge causes of this imbalance in terms of poverty and wealth. And so as I learned more about the dynamics of those relationships, I think that's when my lens started to shift, and I started to think more about how we used animals and what our relationships are with animals and what they should be and what they could be.
I can say a couple things just to echo what
Yes.
you're saying. And so I got into vet school in 1997, and I was 19 years old, so very young. But also the common thing between Dr. Tyler and I is that there was no internet back then. So you were really just seeing the world from one small angle. So what we're telling you today, I would say my best advice is, it's very different. Times have changed, and your experience is very unique. Every one of our experiences is very unique, and you have to feel good about what you're doing and how loud you're talking, how don't take all the battles at the same time, keep your energy, don't burn yourself out. You won't fix everything in 1 year or one session or even through vet school. There will be battles throughout your career. So, but in those days and age, same thing for me. It was, okay, what is the world like? I didn't know, again, much. So what they taught me in school, everybody said, oh, it's normal. This is how it is. And I was really sad a lot, but I took it in, okay, this is normal. But I just took notes, when my classmates and I were talking, I told myself, okay, I'll never do farm animals because I can't handle like the cruelty, the sadness. I won't do race horses because, again, I want to take care of the pets that have owners who love them. I'm going to take care of wildlife. Wildlife was a big passion of mine. And so I chose, at least I saved, you have to save yourself first and decide what your bubble will look like before you can take on the world. And then after vet school, when the internet became a thing and PETA was all over the place, then I realized, okay, I'm not the only one who is sad, who thinks some things are wrong. And just like Dr. Ingrid, we're like, okay, now it's people are coming together and you're more mature, you're realizing that we can do something about different battles. And I've never been a bigger activist than now, because of all those things, because times are changing, people are coming together, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. Very well said. And I'd be curious to hear from both of you, your trajectory through vet school. Was there any specific instance? I know we both have remarkable stories as veterinary students that, changing problematic practices that are kind of woven into the educational curricula. Are you able to share anything like how you navigated that, what your peers, what other students' reactions to these were, what any pushback from faculty, and what kept you going?
Well, I think first and foremost, what kept me going is that I had a friend in my veterinary school class who was an ally and who held some similar beliefs as I did. So that was initially something that was really important. And I think things are changing within veterinary school classes. But at the time when I went to veterinary school, I was vegetarian, which was very, very taboo for veterinary medicine. There's always been a very, very strong reactionary current within veterinary medicine against anything that may challenge the status quo and the ways in which we use animals that are labeled as food. And
Did you, if I may ask a quick question there, did that ever come up when you applied? Like, did they have their guard up that they're like, oh, there's a vegetarian here? And or what about other students who might be of like South Asian descent, where vegetarianism is a norm and not, so do you know what that would have been perceived as?
Yeah, I don't. So yeah, a couple of things on that. No, that never came up in my interview or at any point during my application. And it was in veterinary school itself, it was sort of looked at as an oddity. And there was sort of, I think early on, I kind of got this label of like, oh, we're not sure she's going to make it because she's vegetarian. She's super emotional. She cares too much about animals and stuff. And there's really, there's a desensitization process that goes on in veterinary school because, and I would argue it even starts at the pre-vet level, because so many students come into veterinary school from an animal science degree or from the traditional pre-vet education, which I actually would strongly recommend to explore other options and other degrees as a path into veterinary school, as opposed to those paths. And one of the reasons is that this desensitization process starts then, where students are shaped into thinking that any sign of emotional attachment or any sign of essentially concern for an animal's well-being outside of certain very defined situations is considered irrational, overly emotional, basically, something that is not acceptable for the veterinary profession. And that, I feel like I was kind of labeled early on as like, okay, we know she's a little odd, she's kind of emotional, and we're not entirely sure about her. But
do you think that was weird at all? Like the fact that someone would care about animals is considered weird, is considered like, oh, that person's odd, they care about animals, but we are here wanting to get a degree that's meant to help animals, even though a lot of them have been desensitized because of their pre-vet training. Did that thought ever occur to you, that you're probably the normal, you're kind of going about the normal way?
Well, I mean, one thing is that when you're in a situation like that is intensely competitive, that you struggled so hard to get into, and where it is so important that you succeed. I mean, for me, I was like racking up student loans every year. I could not afford to not succeed at this educational program. When you're in a situation like that, at least in my case, and I think probably for other students, I tended to more like internalize those criticisms and think, okay, maybe I am flawed in some way for thinking like this, or maybe I'm not scientific enough, or I didn't come from the right background to be here. So I think what happens in that situation, the pressure becomes so intense that I started questioning myself, and others may start questioning themselves, which is where support comes in. And having support is so crucial for students in those situations, because being in that moment and in that class and in that school is like a constant pressure cooker. And it can be very difficult to see and to maintain your perspective outside of that pressure.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat, and at this point, Dr. Connolly, also feel free to chime in here. So when you were in vet school, how did the student-teacher power dynamics affect your willingness to express concerns about moral and ethical issues? I think this would also be a good opportunity to share any specific anecdotes that you both may have from vet school.
So I went to school in Montreal, Canada, and looking back now that I can compare with so many vet schools, I can say that my school was great. Um, so there was no terminal surgeries. We had beagle puppies every year. They all were adopted at the end of the year. It was mandatory. They all got a home. So there was no um, nothing so bad that I felt was out of line.
What were the beagle puppies there for?
We spayed and neutered them at the end of the
Oh,
year.
okay.
We learned to draw
Okay.
blood and just restrain. So there was no, we would, obviously our anatomy classes were on cadavers, and we never questioned, if they were sick animals or shelter animals, but at least they came to us dead. So there was no traumatic experience to the level that I'm hearing today. And that makes me even more sad because, again, my vet school, I graduated 22 years ago. And if we were able to do it good back then, like, there is no excuse. And my heart breaks for, all the traumas that students are having to deal with. It's unacceptable, truly, what some of the students have been through. I'm grateful because I don't feel like I'm a very strong, emotionally strong person. So I would not have done well. So I was able to cope with stuff. And we had a shelter at our school. So there was a good collaboration. I felt like animals were well cared for, except, farm animals, again, was different, but it was such the norm. And we went to see a fur farm, which it was disgusting. But again, the teachers, it's society, so I felt like the teachers were just wrapped in society. They were as brainwashed as all of us, it's society's problem. So you're not gonna fix that in vet school. You can fix it after vet school, and that's what we're trying to do. And thanks to Crystal for putting this group together. And she has so much energy. I'm amazed. But like, it's a team effort. And I hope we all live to see the day where animals in farms, are well cared for. So, and so like I said, so my biggest clash with my classmates was at our 10-year reunion. And nobody talks to me anymore. And that's fine, because I needed to speak up. Like, by then I had realized some things, and I just, spoke with my great friends who are all farm animal vets, and nobody would relate to me anymore. And I said to them, they kept saying, well, the animals are so sick, we have to help them. And I said, well, we're making them sick. Like, we're pushing so many, calves out of them, like emotional trauma. We're shredding the babies from the mom. Like, and so by then they kind of, they didn't label me as crazy, but they just felt like, okay, they couldn't cope with this information, and I'm like, that's fine. I'm glad at least they have people helping them. And some of them said to me, the day that people stop consuming dairy products, I'll be happy to not care for the cows anymore, and I'll recycle myself in something else. So I'm like, I get that that's all I can really get out of you people, but I'm hoping there's still seeds that were planted, because nobody had that conversation. That's in Quebec. It's very remote, very French community, so a little bit remote from the world. So I'm hoping my seeds that I planted are still going to lead to something good. And now I know, actually, I've heard, because some of my classmates are teachers and they're getting a harder time from students. So like, they want cows to have pain meds when they get their abscesses out of their feet, like there is, everything is being inspected carefully. Students are they have taken it to a whole other level. So that's great, because again, I feel like my school was not even that bad comparatively to other schools, but there's always room for improvements. There's always conversations, obviously, to have.
Got to get these students in this community. That's amazing that they're asking questions and pushing back. And
yeah. One of my biggest challenges was a few years after vet school. So I had learned to declaw. I declawed a few times, and then I was working in a shelter, and it just like hit me. I'm like, I'm not declawing anymore. So the next cat comes in for a declaw. I'm like, there's no way I'm doing this. I almost lost my job. My boss was very torn, because obviously he understood but he didn't want to upset the clients. By then the technicians kind of took my side, so I was happy, but I knew I might get the door because, you know, I'm a problem by then. That was again many years ago, but I stood my grounds, and my boss, you know, we had a good conversation. He said, okay, we're not going to declaw. Everybody was happy. The family of this one cat particularly didn't like me at first, and then they became my really good clients, and I followed them like for 7-8 years, and the cat was fine, you know, didn't cause any damage. I was educating these people, so it gave me a lot of fuel to keep on pushing to tackle other issues. And I'm just at the point, honestly, I speak a lot more than I used to educate also a lot of my coworkers that I feel are too rough with the animals, so that I've become super sensitive to that. So I try to educate, and I don't let, you know, you have to be the voice for the animals. So those are my battles right now, just speaking up when I see medical torture to patients, you know. You don't have to cysto every animal. You can educate people to collect a urine sample. So much easier for the animals, like just taking care of our patients with dignity. And it goes all around. It's, you know, keeping your coworkers accountable for what they're doing and not going into the, oh, not that they're numb, you know, like a lot of veterinarians, vet technicians become numb to causing pain. No, we should not fall into that, you know, situation. So I wrote 2 books. They're on my website, called Animal Teachings 1 and 2. And it's been a really, really healing process for me. But also I just feel like, okay, this is part of my legacy. There's better ways to do things. We need to talk about everything. Again, planting seeds. Someday, you know, it will snowball, I know. And meanwhile, it's helping me at least cope with our job, because it's really rough. I do work at the ER. Also, I work, I'm volunteer for a wildlife refuge, which is in Florida. So a lot of exotic, a lot of lions and tigers. So I feel like I've never been so emotionally, you know, torn, but at the same time, I have more coping mechanisms, and people like you guys, you know, this group is helping me a lot, at least just realize that I'm not wrong, even though I'm a minority. I'm not wrong in how I feel and what I think the world should look like. So it's helping me.
Yeah, that's a great set of anecdotes, especially the reunion story. So when you said that some of the veterinarians there who were working with animals who are being farmed, that they were saying like, oh, like we have to take care of them, like they're suffering or something along those lines. What were they were they talking about their end of life care? Like what was, because it sounds like they're recognizing that they needed to be taken care of.
Like, because they get milk fever all the time, because we're pushing them out of, you know, they get illnesses. And my point was, well, if we don't push them that hard, if we give them a good life, a balanced life, you know, a happy zen, you know, where they get to see the sun, they're not pushed out, you know. Again, I don't, you know, so many calves and so many heartbreaks. And if we just let them live a life that makes sense, they won't be sick all the time.
That makes sense to them, not what they can do for the human species. Yeah.
And you know, and I was told also, and I've read some literatures, that farmers, they used to care for the animals, and they still do care a lot. Like it used to be small farms, you know, and way back in the days. But now farmers are also highly suicidal because they're part of the system, and they're being they were forced to pick a species and high intensity farming. And that's not where, so it hurts them too. And I know that, like, I mean, I've met farmers and they've told me stories, and I know that everybody is part of that same, we're all forced into that society that makes no sense to anyone anymore, except the rich corporations who are making the money. So I'm hopeful, but money speaks the loudest, sadly. So the challenges are great, and I'm not sure when or if this will end, you know, for the animals. But I rescued a pig who's helping me also cope with life. So he's great, and I spoil him. He's the happiest pig. And
is he part of your family?
Yes.
How did he come into your life? Where was he rescued from?
He escaped from the neighbor's yard with like a few streets down. I didn't know until 6 months later somebody showed up at my property saying that was their pig. And so he just knocked at our fence. We had 4 acres of land. And I saw this pig and I let him in, thinking, well, I'll find his owner. And again, 6 months go by. And by them, I neutered him because I realized why he escaped his enclosure. He was looking for
Finding his boo.
girlfriend.
Yeah.
So he started to hump trying to hump the cats and the dogs and us. And it was just like the worst 24 hours. And then I neutered him the next day and he became the best pig, like amazing. How you remove the hormones and like this pig is amazing. So anyway, 6 months later, these people show up and want their pig back. And by then, like my mama bear instinct had kicked in. I'm like, there's no way nobody's coming close to this pig. But a lot of people here have guns. They were kind of stopping with their cars in front of our property. We luckily we were about to move. So within 2 weeks we were out of there and we took the pig to safety where he would not be meat, because obviously that's what the purpose was. So that's how I ended up with the pig. It was completely unexpected, but he makes me, he heals me. Yeah, every day I get to laugh and rub his belly, and it's a lot of fun. He's smarter than all the dogs I've owned. Pigs are so smart.
Oh yeah,
it's great.
Awesome. That's such a nice story. Dr. Taylor, how about you? Again, what was it like navigating the student-teacher dynamic while in vet school, and specific stories of pushing back? I think there may have been a horse involved.
Yeah, actually, miniature horses, actually. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, story time.
Yeah. So it can feel like the instructors have a lot of power over you in veterinary school, but there are ways that you can push back, and sometimes they're very small ways and sometimes they can be a bit bigger. But I think one thing that I just want to say to potential and current veterinary students is that sometimes those power dynamics do feel insurmountable, but they're not, and you do have power even though you're a student and you're talking to an instructor. And I'm just gonna talk about a couple of different examples because my veterinary school did not offer a lot of alternatives to surgery. There was a terminal dog surgery lab that students were permitted to opt out of. So that I opted out of, and my friend, who I said I did have a friend who, I had one friend, so, and she also
makes all the difference.
Yeah, it does. It really does. So that was one option. And I think where some of the greatest challenges came about was in my large animal labs and large animal rotations. So we did have the only terminal surgery lab that was required that could not be opted out of was for large animals. And we used miniature horses, and each group of 2 or 3 students had one horse to take care of. And then we would do a series of procedures on them. And then ultimately there would be a terminal procedure. My friend and I talked to the administration. We're kind of like, why can't we just adopt out these horses? And they're like, no, it's impossible. You can't find homes for these horses. And, we just don't do it that way. But it was something that we were able to keep pushing and keep talking about. And eventually we were successful in that we were allowed to actually adopt out the horses from this lab. So they did get adopted out, and we found homes for them, which was really a big win, I think. So I think that was sort of a huge moment for me in veterinary school, kind of realizing that, yeah, these power dynamics are tough, but that doesn't mean that I'm powerless, and it doesn't mean that I don't have a voice. But that was just, I would say that was just one win in a very long series of difficult difficult situations. And certainly on my large animal medical rotations and surgical rotations, there were a lot of very difficult situations because it was very, very obvious that animals who were considered farmed animals or animals who are used for food were not treated in the same way as other animals. And that became really obvious to me as I was moving through veterinary school. And there were maybe little things that I could do and that other students could do, advocating for more pain medication. There was one example, really heartbreaking example, when we were at a farm and there was a dying calf on the ground, just laying in the sun dying. No one was going to do anything about it. He was just going to die there. So, and the only thing that we could do was just ask if we could move him to a shady area and get him some water. And that was the only thing that we could ask as students, but it was something. And I know it seems small and it seems horrible to think about that, but I think one lesson that I learned is that there's always an opportunity to look for these small things that you can do to just kind of push that envelope a little bit, to just kind of bring it to people's attention that, okay, this is a living being here, and let's do a small kindness. And I think that may not seem like much, but for some people, it may start that process of questioning. So I think big or small, it is really important to take these actions and see where you can kind of push that envelope of how we're looking at animals and how we're treating them.
For sure, absolutely. Those are great personal stories that I think a lot of us could really benefit from hearing more of. And how did the other students react to were they surprised that someone was advocating for the horse to get adopted, or were they also supportive? Do you think it may have set a precedent for other students to do so?
I'm not sure what the long-term ramifications of that was. I don't know, what happened after that with subsequent classes. And I think, I'll be honest, for the most part, there wasn't a lot of support from other students, but there also wasn't overt negativity or, it was just, I would say most other students seem to kind of want to absent themselves from having that discussion or maybe having that confrontation. And there are factors that I've mentioned, the pressure, and so I'm not gonna vilify anyone for not choosing to engage in that, because there's a lot of psychological pressure and there's a lot of physical pressure. I mean, we would sometimes be on rotations, where I had a couple of times where I did a full day shift in the hospital, and then I had to do an emergency shift overnight, and I was up for 24 hours. And, so there's a lot of that as well. And I'm not saying that to excuse that. I'm just saying that, we don't want to turn students into the villains. We want to understand the situation that they're in and then provide opportunities to find better ways and find ways for students to feel comfortable exercising their voice and speaking up for animals.
That's a great point. And so I think there's just so much we could explore here and go into, the struggles of wanting to fit in or just wanting to get it over with. It's like, okay, I'm going to get through vet school, and then maybe late, or not maybe later, but the plan is always, once I get out, then I can be bolder in being an advocate. But then more often than not, I find that they get out, folks will get out and then see that, oh, like out is very much similar to how it was inside. Like you got to be that closeted pro animal rightsy veterinarian. And so what is that like? So what was that like to transition from the student to, being out there in your career? For both of you, did you feel there were similar power dynamics in play, and how did you navigate that?
I think people are people everywhere. So trying to find your group, living with no regret, the way I would go through vet school, like my best advice to students is you have to be able to live with yourself and sleep at night. So depending on the battles or challenges that you're facing, you have to ask yourself, okay, can I make a difference? For one animal, if it's one life, it's easier to fight for, I think, than trying to change again the whole farm industry. So making sure that you don't just brush it off. If you can make a difference and it's a smaller battle and you think you can tackle it, then go for it, because otherwise it might haunt you forever. So living with no regret. And then, I've worked in many different situations and hospitals for that reason, because I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in this world. I'm a dreamer. I think the potential is there in this world to be good and to be quite perfect, because again, the potential is there. Like, all of us are great people. Everybody can unnumb themselves. Society is trying to numb everyone. I mean, that's been the case. That's our biggest problem. But there is a way to reopen people's hearts. So I try to push, when I'm around people that are open, that are receptive, then I'll thrive. I'll stay there longer. When I feel like, and again, for XYZ, like Dr. Taylor said, some teachers, some bosses, some people are just not ready. Like right now at my job, there's 3 of us who are vegan. And it's pretty upsetting when I hear other people talk, because they're so numb and they're able to make jokes about the fact that they're not vegan. And it hurts me to my core. But I have to, again, look at the big picture. I know that I'm still planting seeds and I'm not ready to leave, because I have some good clients. I have a good situation going on, and I can't expect everybody to go vegan. But the level of awareness, that's always what shocks me the most, is how numb people can be. And even when they're aware and there is vegan people around, and the fact that they are still so stuck in their little world, and it's okay for them. So again, you do what you can, but you must preserve yourself. And that's, I'll be 45 and I feel really old all of a sudden. And I feel like my body, like I've been 22 years of adrenaline rushing. Like, this job is hard and we have to preserve ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. Because I would like to live a long life and to be able to help more. So I have to really protect and find ways to shield and really achieve balance, emotionally, and what I'm going to be willing to do. And so right now, my boss might see a lot of things differently, but I'm fully free to not crop ears, no ducking tails, no declawing. I can say pretty much anything I want. So I do push, because I know people, my clients, love me because I am super caring and I will speak for their animals so they trust me. They might not trust others that I work with, but they know that when their pet is not going to be with them, I will be speaking up for their pet, and I will make sure that everybody is kind. So that makes me happy, and I wish I could do more, but you have to celebrate the small wins.
Yeah, and Crystal clearly agrees here. Don't want to do dental, so I don't do them. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. And that's a good thing to keep in mind. And I know it's hard as students, you feel like there's that, oh, I gotta do what I gotta do so I can just get through this course. But and we talk a lot about making change and mobilizing folks to make change, and sometimes it can feel like we're just the only one who feels that way. So what advice would you have for students who feel like they should they need to be quiet to get through vet school, and ways so they can feel safe to advocate for their ethics and their morals while also not feeling like they're jeopardizing their education? Any advice that you may have to offer there?
I just wanted to quickly comment on the previous question because about the transition from veterinary school to practice. And this was kind of touched on, but I just wanted to reiterate it because I think it's so important that something that really helped me was that when I came out of veterinary school, I had a set of lines that I would not cross. And I was upfront with those when I was interviewing for jobs at practices. Things like Dr. Joanne had mentioned, like no declaws, no ear crops. I won't do repro cases. So I came out and I had those very clearly defined. And I made it clear right up front that those were my lines that I don't cross. And I will be honest, I had no problem finding a job like that. And that's something that I just want to let students know, that even though you're graduating, you feel like maybe you don't have a lot of experience yet and don't have a lot of negotiating power, but you can absolutely negotiate that when you're looking for a job. And for me, that really helped me with the transition into practice and helping me feel comfortable knowing that I wouldn't be asked to do things that I feel were unethical. So sorry, I just wanted to jump back to that question.
No, that's great.
I think it's an important point.
We can get back to my follow-up question later because, well, I love, there's another comment. My line is working more than 8 hours a day. And that's, I think, like being mindful again of what your capacity is. I have another question. Yes. Dr. Taylor, how would you summarize the process you used to persuade your program to not kill the miniature horses and give them up for adoption? Did you talk with the instructors or the teachers in person? Did you write a letter? So I think that's a great question. So if we know the specifics, students can probably adopt a similar approach when they're wanting to address similar issues they may be facing in their respective programs.
Yeah. For us, it was all done in person, and it helped that there were 2 students, and that none of the other students really raised objections to it or anything. So,
did you schedule a meeting with the instructor? Okay.
Yeah, we had. I'm trying to remember. This was a long time ago. Sorry. I think it took a couple of meetings, and they were all done in person, and they were all. I believe it was with the director of the program. So there were a few meetings, and the other thing was also finding community adopters who would be willing to take the horses. That was a really huge step because they were never going to agree to anything without that step being in place. And basically the agreement was, you will handle all of this, where if we agree to let you do this, you are going to handle all of this, and it better be handled really well. So so there was no letter writing involved or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, we basically knew all of the key decision makers in this. We knew them from the program, and we had taken classes with them or interacted with them in some way. So basically just like meeting with the director and the relevant faculty member. And as I recall, it did take a few meetings. It wasn't just like a one-time thing. So I'd say persistence, having a process in place that you can back up, that you can say, okay, this is going to work. Doing your research to make sure that it's feasible. And then face-to-face meetings worked for us. So
that's good. That's really tangible, good advice on, okay, this is exactly what, it's not necessarily going to be what everybody has to do, but it's good to know that you schedule a meeting. And do you give them a heads up as to what you were going to talk about in the meeting, or just like, hey, I want to have this meeting? Or
this is getting so granular now for like almost 20 years ago.
I'm that kind of person. It's like, I need to know exactly what you did. So
I don't
That's
remember that part. I mean,
that's
we probably said something about what it was going to be about, but I don't remember how specific we got.
yeah.
I mean, they knew
Because I
us.
think of
way
the
we had
nitty
it.
gritties of like, what would the email subject line be? It's like meeting related to, the
Miniature
slab.
horses.
Yeah, it's like, and then I don't know, they're like, oh no. But hey, that's how we get things done. That's a good like that's really good advice. And again, for it, and this can vary. I'm assuming for different issues that are being brought up, like, are you able to provide peer-reviewed evidence of other approaches that can be used, so you don't need to use a live miniature horse, like so those are similar examples of what we can do, like.
Yeah, and I will say at the time, I had no clue about alternatives to surgeries, like, other ways of learning surgery other than on a live animal. I had no idea about that, like back in the early 2000s. But yeah, that's one of the great things today, is that now there is so much research and there are so many options, and there are companies that are actively producing these alternatives, and there are schools that are actively using them. So there are a lot of resources out there now. It's just a matter of getting people to buy into them, because the evidence is there, and the fact that they work is there. We know this. We've seen it in programs. So it's the buy-in at this point.
Oh, I definitely agree. As I have no experience in the vet school space, but I think a lot of what both of you have shared are very similar to, people who are just living in a world that might not align with their values and ethics 100%, but are still figuring out ways how to navigate that, but also making the change. And yeah, I think we can go back to that question of like, okay, how do we okay, actually we do have a really good question here in the chat. Have any of you thought about how to ask for help from animal protection organizations? That is a great question for vet students. I'm sure there will be alarm bells raised if within the higher up. So yeah, like share your thoughts on
nowadays, like,
there's
so many ways to reach out. Like, if I were a student today, I would be on Vin a lot. I would take screenshots of people agreeing with me, or like having like articles that have already been written by DVM 360, clinicians brief. There's a lot of great articles about mental health, about how it affects us, just anything that can help support your case, so when you bring it up to your teachers, you're not alone. You have some backup documentation. Personally, I'm huge on killing with kindness. So like, I do this with my clients too. The more you compliment them, the more you tell them how great they are, and then even make them feel like it's their idea that you're bringing up to them. It works great, because people want to be loved. So I tried to go the soft route, and the, hey, you're doing an amazing job, can you help me with this? Just really making it sound like they're going to be the hero in the story. And I really don't care if I'm not. I just want the animals to be well cared for. But that goes a long way for people who have a big ego and who need to be in charge, and they're the teachers, and it should be their way. So trying to make them feel like it is their idea totally, and it goes a long way.
I love one of the comments. Joanne Connolly embodies the militant vegan they're all scared of. So funny. That's funny. But yeah, I think I would love to hear your thoughts, Dr. Taylor, as one who has worked in the animal protection space extensively, and I've had the honor of working with as well. What are your thoughts about asking help from animal protection organizations, and as a veterinary student, and how I think this could be something that animal protection groups can also learn from, is how they can effectively support students in the vet community in a similar manner?
Yeah, I think my impression is that these types of initiatives, I think, would be more successful coming internally from students and from veterinarians. I think that there is a lot of there's kind of a difficult relationship between the veterinary profession and animal protection groups. There's a lot of distrust there. I think there's a lot we can analyze about that and where that comes from.
I
But
think we could do an entire talk or a series on that.
probably, yeah. So I think because of the difficult dynamics of that relationship, I think that change can be more successful when it's initiated by students and by other veterinarians, and moved forward in that way. And in terms of how animal protection organizations can support, to be honest, I'm not sure what the inroads are right now into the veterinary profession in terms of that relationship. But I do think that these organizations are extremely valuable in the way that they are creating awareness about animal suffering. They're creating awareness and causing people to think more about how we are interacting with animals and treating animals. And I think all of that is helpful in terms of creating an environment where this is an issue that people are starting to think about. And I do really love what Dr. Joanne said about, taking a kind approach. I think there are so many veterinarians that want to improve the profession, that want to do better for animals. And I think just finding the right way to communicate with those veterinarians is really going to make a difference for animals and also for veterinary students, because I think there are a lot of veterinarians that are, that went through veterinary school and feel like maybe they had to do things that they didn't feel great about. They're maybe not vocal about it, but I think that if we can have students and veterinarians talking, then, and have these initiatives coming from them, then I think that we could be really successful.
Yeah. And then get all of these people into like those big conferences, the big places where these decisions are happening, and show that, hey, this is the future of the profession, not the few people who are profiting off of some practices that I'm sure the folks here on this call don't agree with. But do you think there is absolutely no, wouldn't say absolutely to be like the decree, but is there no way for students to get support from animal protection groups? Because maybe at times they may feel like the only organization that is going to resonate with how I feel about the way the curriculum requires me to treat this cow is an animal rights group or an animal protection group. And I'm going to feel like I'm going to go there, which is where our honor is hoping to kind of bridge that and be like, okay, let us be the space, because this, like you said, is going to be that veterinary community. But that also comes with that, okay, there is still that animal protection group that maybe people are more aware of and are wanting to seek advice from. So what do you think on that? If there is any sort of solace that they could get from such groups?
Well, I think support definitely, and validation of their concerns, but also I think some of these groups have great resources to be able to provide data and research support, and maybe support, like helping, like, how do I compose a letter to to address the administration, or things like that I think could really be a resource for students.
100%. And that reminds me that these groups do a lot of research into alternatives, or what I like to call upgrades to the status quo of how we're using how animals are being used in different medical settings. So that would be a great way, like, hey, I'm worried about this issue, and do you have resources that I can provide to suggest alternatives? So I think animal protection groups definitely have a good they have a good resource base on that, and they do their due diligence, as far as I'm aware, to make sure that all the data is set. So that's a good angle to address, but also acknowledging that the veterinary profession and animal rights groups might not see eye to eye as one from the outside might, because you think of the veterinary profession as one that's taking care of animals, animal rights groups also advocating for animals. And it's interesting to me, but I think we've talked quite a bit about what goes into all of that. And I'm excited to explore that more with this community of veterinarians who continue to fight the good fight. So any wise words, any other questions, feel free to chime in. We have reached the hour, and I know we both are busy, so I don't want to take
I'll
it
say
too
one
much.
last thing.
Yes, please.
I mean, I think focusing on how to fix the problem, not just saying, hey, we have a problem, but saying, hey, this is how we can fix it. So brainstorming with animal activist groups, whoever, just brainstorming with students or whoever you have in your circle. I mean, mom gives great advice a lot of times too, like people that are totally unrelated to your world, and they'll listen to you like, oh my God, like, can you believe that's what you're saying? And then, anybody can have a way to help you fix a problem. So then it's always easier when you have a way to fix a problem. And I wanted to say, so I was invited on a veterinary podcast where we tackled so many issues. We described the utopic world, like the best world that we want it to be for animals. And it's with Dr. Julie Capel, and her podcast is called the Veterinary Life Coach Podcast. And so that's one way, like you could just play, a blip of the podcast, whatever part helps you fight your battle. But we were even talking about banning brachycephalic breeds, because I'm sorry, but they're suffering. They have so many health issues. We could go on that, but I've had to euthanize so many Frenchies at 3 years of age from intractable seizures, whatever, heat strokes when it's not even hot outside. So there is so many battles, that we could elaborate on. But the podcast was great because it's when you get an opportunity to really be free and think, as far as your mind can go into what the perfect world would be for animals. It's really healing too. And then you come up with great ideas. So again, brainstorming as a team, it's great for everyone and for the animals, most importantly. So thank you guys. It was fun tonight.
Yeah, no, and again, this is exactly what the two of you have said. This is what our honor is here for. We want to support the veterinary profession and the community as a whole, students, current veterinarians who are, having these, wanting to make change and not sure where the community is. And yeah, whatever support is needed, we would love to help out in any way. And most importantly, create that network, because I think the more we grow, it's important to make the presence of this community very obvious. Else it's just going to be like, that one fringe person, as opposed to it being a movement of veterinarians who are advocating for a kinder, just world for all creatures. So yeah, thank you again. Anything from you, Dr. Taylor?
No, thank you for having me. It's great that we're having this discussion. I think it's really important, and I am looking forward to what future generations of veterinarians are going to do and how they're going to move the needle in terms of how we care for and live with animals.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you again to everyone who joined, those who are tuning in through the live stream. This is recorded, so we will be uploading that. Just be sure to follow our honor on all social media platforms. And if there are any veterinarians, veterinary students in your lives, bring them in, and this will be a community that has their back no matter what. And we'll keep moving forward.
Thanks so much, Shreya. Thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you. Bye.